Hey everyone, this is Olivia.
And I'm Ryan.
And we're here for our podcast number 2, Axiomatic Wisdom. And to start off, we just want to recap the series that we're doing. We're going back to the basics and to the roots of all humans, and we're kind of looking at the next, 15 weeks. We're looking at some topics that are really relevant to people and humans now, just like they were thousands of years ago. And we're starting off the next few weeks with what we call virtues, which are just kind of some qualities and aspects that, when we're using them, really enhance us and help us grow in a positive direction. And then we're going to turn over to what we call vices, which are kind of aspects and actions and qualities that sort of are more regressive and kind of hold us back and cause barriers in our life. And then we're going to end with about 5 podcasts about equality, which is kind of just how we keep it all together. And so last week we talked about love, which is like our big umbrella for this whole virtues subtopic. And this week we're going to talk about what we call flow.
Yeah, so flow is this, it's sort of a weird word to use when you're putting it in with things like love, but it is sort of this understanding that is just thought and believed by a whole bunch of different groups of people, but it's always used in very different language.
Right.
So when we say flow, we've sort of stolen and created this word to use it to describe what everyone is really trying to get out here.
Right, and we tend to use a lot of symbols, I feel like, and a lot of metaphors, and I think this is just a way, it's just different language of one idea and of different views and perspectives to really just help us understand, because I feel like sometimes these topics are so big and they're really hard to comprehend and make applicable to our lives, so using symbols is really helpful to understand.
Yeah, and I think that the process of making symbols is a very widely done thing.
Right.
When people are trying to teach anything, whether it's math, philosophy, or just how to live a good and happy life. I come from a sort of Christian tradition, so I know how Jesus himself and Moses and a lot of the Jewish and Christian prophets and teachers tended to use a lot of things like that, a lot of metaphors and stories and parables to kind of talk about what they were trying to describe.
Right. It's really interesting, and I think sometimes one symbol or story or parable is really someone will connect to that really well and be like, they'll have that aha moment and that epiphany of, I finally am starting to understand that concept, whereas for someone else it would be a different kind of example or perspective to kind of help them understand. So it's just kind of an exploration to see what works for you.
This is it's pretty contrary to what we have a lot in Western thought, because in Western thought a lot of times you just have thought.
Yeah.
where you try to intellectualize everything and you stop feeling things and you stop thinking about things in a way that is more emotional as such. So when we talk about flow, we don't mean anything specific exactly. We're talking about this bigger idea that is present in all of humanity.
Right. So I guess we should just kind of start out with talking about what flow is and what it is not, to give some ideas and kind of get us warmed up.
Yeah. I think that we'll start with talking about the things that flow isn't.
Right.
For instance, flow is not a transaction, most of all. Flow is something that you are always receiving, something you are always being given, you could say. And you're not exactly giving while you are also getting. A transaction, to be specific, like say you go into a store and you want to buy a notebook. You see the notebook that you want to buy, and that specific notebook has a specific price, because for each one thing the store sells, it has a very specific and exact price for that one item. So when you go to the front to check it out, you give them money in the exact proportion for what you are buying. And it's this very transactional situation where this one thing, the notebook, is equal exactly to this other thing. But in this whole flow idea, there is a give and there is a take, but nothing's exact. Everything kind of is and isn't.
Right. And I really like the way you explain that, because that shopping transaction example, it's so close-ended. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and then it's over. And with flow, it's just like it sounds. It keeps flowing on and on. There's no end or beginning necessarily.
It's student loans that never stop.
Yeah.
But you actually kind of like them.
Yeah, exactly. I love that.
So, another thing that flow is not is flow doesn't really account for the person you are or the past you have or the things you've done in your past. Flow is this universal thing that comes to everybody, no matter their name, their influence, their money, their anything at all. We are all equally deserving of this divine flow, this source, this energy. We use the word flow very sort of loosely here because we cannot really think of a better word in the language to kind of get at what we're trying to think of here.
Right. I really like the whole action or past thing, because you don't want to ignore what you've been through, because it affects who you are and the kind of things that you can give and who you are just as an individual. But you don't want to pay too much attention or start tallying up things, because then it gets selective or judgmental. And at the end of the day, like Ryan said, everyone is deserving equally. And lost my thought.
So now we kind of want to talk about what flow is. So Olivia, do you want to tell us about that?
Yes, I do. Flow is a gift you don't deserve. I know personally, looking at everything we've been through, I mean, flow is so real. Flow is love and compassion and grace and all these words, and we may not deserve that. But like he said, it's an unequal transaction. But the more that we give, the more that we get, and it kind of all equals out in the end.
Yeah. I think a lot of this idea comes to the comparison of the idea of a transaction.
Right.
So flow is very unearned, whereas it doesn't matter what you give in the flow, because you will always be receiving. You'll always be getting.
Right. And I like the flow metaphor, because you could be giving, your energy and your time or whatever to various things, but you might be receiving from different aspects of your life. So it's not like you go to a store and you give this and it's the same kind of exchange or whatever the word is, but you could be receiving from another source but be giving to another. It just kind of all flows together.
Yeah. Maybe you're a father or a family figure or something, and you have your job that you work because it pays the bills and it keeps the family alive and happy. And because of your situation, you may not be entirely happy with the job you have, but having the family you do, it gives you life, and it fills you with a love and an energy that keeps you working. Not because you need the money, because you do need the money, but you're working because you need to support the family you have and support that life you're living with them.
Right. I love that.
So perhaps this idea of flow is a little weird or foreign to some of us. So I'm going to talk about the sort of Christian equivalent of the idea of flow. There's a lot of religions that have ideas of this. Some of them talk about it very explicitly, like Christianity, and others are a bit more subtle with it. So we're going to look at Christianity's idea of it, just because it is sort of the most specific and talked about, even though a whole bunch of other religious sects talk about it a lot as well.
Right. I mean, if you were to look at, I look at the Dhammapada, the Bhagavad Gita a lot, and there's not really a word for grace like there is in Christianity.
Yeah.
So they kind of piggyback that onto their ideas of love and of mindfulness. So it's kind of, I feel like in Christianity, they kind of separate it out a little bit more to kind of discuss it. And so I think that's why we want to talk about it, because it just has so much content about it. It's very clear.
As Olivia said, the Christian form of this idea is the word grace. So I want to look at a book written by a man named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And this was a German theologian in the 1940s. And he wrote this book called The Cost of Discipleship. And one of the major ideas he outlines in this book is the distinction between what he calls cheap grace and costly grace. So when he talks about these, it sort of reminds me of a healthy relationship and an unhealthy relationship. He says that cheap grace is very sort of shallow, detached, and not connected. It's sort of like you're getting everything from the flow, but you're not giving anything. And what Olivia and I think is that it's the giving in the flow that actually gives yourself fulfillment. Mm-hmm. So what Dietrich says here in the book is that being a part of cheap grace is you're receiving everything, but you don't get any of the joy of giving. Opposite to this idea of cheap grace is the idea of costly grace. And costly grace is a passionate sort of love, really, that's full of fire, and most of all, it's engaged and it's expressing.
Right, and that's so important with this flow that we're talking about. You have to be engaged with it.
Yeah.
Because that implies that giving in the take.
We think that the give is more important than the take. Not because you need to give more than you take, per se.
Right.
But it's because the give is what gives you the emotional health and stability of this whole thing.
Right. It's also kind of a release. We were kind of talking about earlier how really creating is not necessarily for a specific audience, but just releasing that and giving that to whoever takes it is really cathartic for oneself.
Yeah.
Giving doesn't always imply that it's taking something from you, that you have to give a part that you can't give back. It's not like you're going to give and then be left with nothing.
Yeah.
It's
a lot of times I feel like some of the things that I give to others, and instead of dividing what I have in half and giving that half to them, I just multiply what I have and give it to them. Right. So instead of it feeling like I'm losing something in the process of giving, I'm now sharing what I have, and now we both have the experience together.
Right, that's sharing. I love that.
And we have a medium of connection, which we'll get to soon.
Yes. I just want to reiterate, we kind of mentioned this earlier, but true flow is love, and it's more, what's the word? I don't want to say holy, but it's very pure. Yeah. And it's not selfishness. And so that's why giving is just as important as taking. You just need both. And either one doesn't make you selfish or a better person or a worse person. It's just that balance. It's kind of just the natural way that life goes. Yeah. And life naturally flows this way. And it's kind of up to us to either flow with the current or try to fight it.
For sure. So, to get a little bit personal, I'll first talk about this kind of, it's a personality system. So it's called the Enneagram, and you may or may not be familiar with it, but just a brief description is it's a personality sort of system where there are 9 different personality categories inside of it, and each different one describes uniquely a sort of personality or characteristic of a person. So without diving into any of the details of any of that, I will say we don't have that kind of time here. I'll say that what my personality type says about me is that my biggest sort of objective and goal in life is just to seek the love and acceptance and approval of others. So a lot of times the way that my own personality seeks to kind of find that love is just to give as much as I can. But a lot of times when I sort of start to become more desperate in an emotional way, I start to give some of the worst parts of myself in hopes that I will get some of the better parts of other people.
Wow.
And this is a different kind of giving, because we feel that there's giving that is healthy and honest and life-giving and fulfilling, but then there's also a form of giving that is unhealthy because you're giving away the worst parts of yourself that people don't really want.
Right. And sometimes, like you said, for an ulterior motive.
Yeah.
Emotionally. And I think that kind of touches on like our next subtopic when we talk about those vices, because there's other, we're talking about all these positive and great things, and that's great, but there's still these darker parts of ourselves that get in the way. Even if we have the best intentions, there's still sometimes you just get in those emotional wrecks, and we just have to kind of learn how to move past those. So I think that's very good. Different side of that, how you're almost giving too much.
Yeah.
And maybe not giving healthily and honestly.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That's great.
Notice how she said giving too much. We think that the giving is very important to yourself for your own health, but at the same time it is very possible to give too much, because you essentially just drain yourself of all of your own energy
literally
and love in the process, and you've turned something that is at its heart meant to be very good and healthy for you into essentially your own enemy.
Right. And Ryan brought up this kind of metaphor earlier. It's like when you're outside and it's raining, and if you say rain is kind of the giving, and if you use an umbrella, you're not receiving that rain, but it's still going to be there whether you use the umbrella or you don't. Yeah. And so if you stop using the umbrella, then you're able to receive as well as give. It's just kind of a way to look at it.
Yeah.
That's sometimes we get so caught up in giving and giving that we don't just take that one moment to remove the umbrella and just feel the water on us.
Yeah. Like so many other kinds of emotional and spiritual ideas, it exists on a spectrum where, yes, you can be giving too much to others, but you can also put up your own umbrella in a way, and you can stop taking. And both of these are very unhealthy, and you don't want to be on either end of the spectrum. You want to be sort of in a happy middle place where you're giving and you're taking just exactly what you need.
I know. I always think it's interesting. I feel like people just think that you should give and never take, but that's so unhealthy, and it has to be in this engagement and this balance, or one day you're not going to be able to give anything because you have nothing left. You can't do too much of both.
And in my experience, when you get to that point, you keep trying to give, but all you have left is literally utter shit, and you're just you're dishing it out to everyone, exactly. And nobody wants it because it's not good anymore. Right.
I love that. And Ryan, you mentioned this a few minutes ago, but we really like flow, and it's the medium to how we connect with others. It's a natural part of us. We talked a lot in the last podcast about how love was a lot of connectedness and kind of breaking down those barriers to connect with other people. And in that connection is that flow.
Yeah, I feel like this flow is sort of the medium for the connection, in a way. It could even be said that it's a flow of love. The Christians call it grace, where they say that God or Christ could be continuously loving, unconditionally, always giving to you.
Right.
And that in Christianity's context represents that half of the flow. And then the give that you partake in is sort of your mission in Christianity.
Right.
And this can also be seen in other religions.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's kind of an integral part of all religions.
Yeah.
But just because even if you don't associate with a religion, it's still, I think, a natural part of ourselves. Mm-hmm. It's just whether we choose to engage with it or not. And what we call it. We're not calling this grace. We're calling it flow.
Yeah. We want to call it flow and not grace because, for one, grace seems like a very Christian-oriented idea. But at the same time, this represents a very broad scheme of a lot of things.
Right.
Like, depending on the language you want to use, you could say God, you could say source, you could say ground, you could say earth, you could say universe. There is so many different things that you could be getting in life from. You could be receiving nourishment from the food you eat, quite literally. And there's just so many ways that you can participate in the getting of all of this.
Right. That was so well explained. So I guess now it's kind of a call to, for us individually and for anyone listening to kind of look at your own life and see, what are you receiving and where?
Yeah. And also, even more specifically, what are you feeling called to receive? Because a lot of times you can live life and there's plentiful amounts of giving just everywhere, and you can start to receive whatever you want. So for me, I always try to make it my personal mission to receive what I'm going to try to use.
Yeah.
So for me, when I'm doing all of these podcasts and also a blog that I do, I want to try to soak in all of these ideas and find how they connect. I'm trying to take all the giving that I get with these thoughts and ideas that I have in daily life, whether it's reading a book, listening to another podcast, or even just having thoughts to myself as I'm walking to class about how these ideas connect. And I'm just trying to mold them together and shape them and come to a new and a better understanding about how this really works. And for me, that's what this give is. So then I am trying to give back in the form of this podcast.
Right. And so you can use the podcast or even just in your personal relationships or how you kind of treat yourself and other people and any interaction you have. Yeah, we're trying to give what we're taking in this podcast. And it can be big or little. Yeah. It permeates, this flow permeates every part of yourself. And I like how you said it's really important that you are aware of both sides, that you're aware of, the places where you're receiving and what, but also where that you can give and what you can receive. I feel like sometimes everyone feels really out of control in their lives and that they don't have, and it's natural, but that there's no control, that I can't change how, but I feel like there's parts of our lives that if we don't find that aspect of our life beneficial to us, we don't have to engage or receive with that if it's not healthy for us.
Yeah. There is this sort of beauty and this honesty and trying to just keep yourself going and keep yourself stable and focused on one sort of mission. Not exactly one mission, but one or two forms of things. At this point in my life, I'm trying to limit myself to only music-like things and only spiritual and emotional type things. And both of these are for my own growth. I go to college to be a music student, to study to be a professional performer. So that is a very big part of my life where I want to spend my time and my energy and my emotion and essentially my satisfaction and happiness just devoting myself to studying and learning and soaking in everything I can about that. But at the same time, I'm also incredibly fascinated with these ideas of spirituality and what it means to be a human being in a world that has so many different ways to account for and discuss these ideas that seem so humanly relatable. So I want that to be as well one of my main focuses. And a lot of times I'll become very drawn towards other focuses that I see in life. Maybe it's other forms of giving that I've kind of run into and encountered, and I become very interested in those. And it becomes very tempting to me to sort of dive into those and learn more about them and say, well, but wait, what if I got into that? What if I started learning more about that? And I need to sort of remind myself that that's completely fine, but I cannot overwork myself, because there's only so much that I can get, and there's only so much that I can give.
Right. And I love how you said the word honesty. You have to be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
To really see what you can handle. I know sometimes we like to think that we can do everything, and we can, but it takes
but not all at once.
Yeah, but not all at once. You have to pick and choose, and that's so hard. I know it's easier said than done, definitely. But just really analyzing, it's okay to tell yourself, I can't do that right now.
Yeah.
You know, and that I have these priorities, and right now I just don't have the energy or the ability to give or get right now, that certain part.
And if you're anything like me, then you will get bored with the one or two things that you have going on. And that is completely fine, because it just means that you need to rediscover what you're doing in a new light.
Yes.
And also, if you're anything like me, when you do rediscover that, it is the most exciting and enlightening thing you've ever done, because then you have all of the ways you've understood that one thing before, now with the added beauty and depth and interest of this new discovery that you have.
Right.
And sometimes these discoveries come from just moving the perspective you have of this thing, or reading a book about it, or listening to somebody new talk about it. Maybe, let's say that for me, I've always looked at music in a very classical sort of way, and I always listen to the classical musicians, and I always think about music in a very sort of formal concert attire, black suit sort of way. Maybe for me, when I start to get bored, I need to go to a jazz club. Maybe I need to see the more relaxed guys who are sitting in the back smoking, just playing the piano from what they feel. And from that, I can find this whole new appreciation to this thing that I've become so familiar with. And it just makes life seem so much more worth living.
Yeah, I'm so fascinated with the word exploration, because there's so many ways that you can explore different things, and it's all just with this curiosity. You know, I don't know what I'm gonna get out of it per se, but it's just this new experience that I'm adding to the knowledge, and like you said, things that I could be bored with or interested in. It just keeps adding and exploring, and we keep changing and shifting in this flow. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. Life is the epitome of a create your own adventure.
Yeah, exactly.
And just because you feel like you're walking in a flat field doesn't mean you have no control over it.
Right.
You may not have a lot of control over what you're doing, but maybe you can start looking
baby steps
at different things. Maybe that field can take on new interest if you just look at it a different way.
Right.
Or maybe you could start moving toward the mountain. Or maybe you could start moving back the way you walked, and you suddenly see this entire field you were just in, but suddenly it is in the completely flipped direction from how you saw it before.
Right. I think we have more power and control than we think we do. I think we're just scared.
Yeah. And completely contrary to that, there's a peace in knowing that we have absolutely no power over anything at all. And there's so much beauty in that, because that field we could be walking in might just suddenly be hit by a tornado. And while we have absolutely no control over that, it adds interest for us.
Right.
So why not celebrate or grieve or enjoy or just soak in whatever is happening in this field of your life?
Right. Yeah, take it in the moment. Everything's temporary
Yeah.
in some way or another. I love that.
So to kind of move towards the end of this podcast, we want to reiterate that this flow is just a continuous movement of love. That you are always receiving just grace and beauty and enjoyment and love and satisfaction and knowledge and fascination and all of these amazing things. And with that, you are able to shape them and move them, sculpt them into this thing that we call life. And you are able to just move all of these things that you receive into whatever form it is you really desire, and just call it whatever you want.
Right, yeah. You don't have to have a word. Like we talked about the last podcast, sometimes just words don't give credit.
Yeah.
It's that realization. And if you feel there's some imbalance in your life, just try to honestly explore the parts of you, what's going on in your life, maybe what you could modify, because true flow is balance and love, and it's not hindered by anything else.
Yeah. Maybe your life feels imbalanced because you're receiving too much of the flow and you're not doing anything with it.
Right. Maybe you don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And that's just something, like I said, you just got to explore.
Yeah.
Think about it.
And it's my firm belief that the more you dig into it and the more you think about it, the easier you're going to find what you can do with all of this. And if you're full of fear, just because you know what you have to do, but you really don't want to do it, that's okay.
Just take baby steps. It's not all going to change in 1 second. You have to kind of acclimate yourself to new things.
Of course.
Start small, and that'll build your confidence into feeling like you have more and more control, or less control.
Yeah. It's all good, though.
Right.
The last thing we want to encourage you with is to be engaged and just be aware of what it is you're receiving in your life and what it is you want to receive more of. Think of how you can shape your life, what friends you can have and what friends you can possibly stop having to move your life into the better direction that you really want your life to be going in.
Yeah, it's like that. It just reminded me of that Shakespeare quote where it's like, life is a stage and we're, merely the actors or whatever. Show up to your own life, be engaged and see where that can take you.
Yeah, and since we are all human beings on this planet and we've already shared this much in common, I can promise you with just about all my assurance, if you don't find exactly what you need, you will find an amazing time on the adventure you go on. So, with all of this pseudo-wisdom, or as the kids say, axiomatic wisdom, we hope you have a good week, and we will talk to you in the next one.